Greetings, Super Wednesdays, here in the Holy Land, Holy Apple, Holy Time. Really happy to be here today. I'll tell you why, especially today I'm happy to be here, because I got hitched from Elon Moreh to the Tapuach intersection here, and I'm really happy to be here because I had a few question marks. This guy, this driver, he was passing left, right. He was flying all over the place. I was praying, I hope I get there. I hope I get there to this class. So we're really happy to be with y'all here on Super Wednesdays. Okay, hope everybody's ready. Got your seatbelts ready. We're really going to go for a ride over here. And I've said it before, say it again, with Hashem's help. It's all Hashem. Pass the word. These words, these classes, they're not really out there. Not many people here. If you're listening, do yourself, take some time and pass it on to others so we get the message out. The idea is the message. Doesn't matter who the messenger is. The message. That's what's important. And we don't have all the vehicles, we don't have all the apparatus that others do have. So, help us out, give us a hand. Okay, today's subject is going to be no Jew will be left behind! Exclamation mark. Oh, really? Question mark. No Jew will be left behind! Exclamation point. Oh, really? Question mark. Okay. Fasten your seatbelts. We're going for a ride over here. We're going to hit it out of the park today. In the prophet Micha, chapter 7, verse 15, there's a famous verse there. Many of you might have heard it. It says that just like the days that we left Egypt, I will show you in the future tremendous miracles. So the Torah in many places, probably dozens of places, in many sources, they deduct from this verse that we should know the prototype of redemption for the Jewish people is Egypt. If you want to see how it's going to play out, if you want to see how it's gonna roll, then you always have to check the source. And the source of redemption, especially in our times, which we are the last redemption, always look back at the Exodus from Egypt. So our sages, our sources give us dozens of examples of similarities that will be in our times, in our redemption, God willing, today, this hour, this minute. And they are similar to what was perpetrated in Egypt. Now, with that said, and we'll get to some of the similarities in just a minute, but with that said, of course, there are other verses that tell us that there will be, of course, in the final redemption that we are at the threshold of, there will be differences. It will be much on a higher scale, and it will be forever. So definitely there are differences, but there are many things that are similar. So let's take it away. The Tanchuma in Parshat Va'era, the portion of Va'era, tells us an amazing thing. Amar Rabbi Eliezer ben Padat, Rabbi Eliezer the son of Padat, tells us that just like God brought upon plagues upon the Egyptians, in the future, during the exile of Rome, that is the present, the Western civilization, the Western world, this is the present exile that we're in, God will repeat those plagues before the final redemption. Now this is pretty wild. Anybody that happens to notice, anybody happened to notice, last week, right, we read about the 3 plagues were in the portion of Bo. One of them happened to be the locust. If you saw in Mecca, there was a tremendous plague of locusts. When we're reading in the synagogues all over the world, we're reading about the plague of locusts. Men in Mecca, at the mosque over there, they're just getting hit. You see a guy, you see people with these white robes on. They look like KKK robes, like the Klan members. And you see, it's just like hundreds of these locusts on their garb. And you look at the walls and you look in the air, and it's amazing. And that was the week that we read the portion about the locust. So this is an example. And the Tanchuma goes through a whole list. Amazing thing. Whatever we saw, as I like to say, what was, is, and will be. What was in the future will be in the present and will be also in the future. So our sages are telling us straight out, you will see a repeat performance, probably on a higher scale, of plagues, which is very interesting because we're not going to go into it right now, but if you're a news watcher, you could see around the entire world there are tremendous plagues that are happening. You see, for example, hail. You see sometimes these hail, they look like a football. The size of footballs coming at you. You see people's cars, see people's trucks that were hit by these hail stones, I guess we could call them. And you see fish dying by the millions. All this, just remember that the plagues will return. So that first similarity, plagues. Number 2, from the book Tiferet Shlomo, in the portion of the week B'Shalach, which happens to be this week, he says that it is a known thing. It is known that all the miracles that happened to our forefathers in Egypt, it is all a preparation for the end days. This is like the opening show. Whatever, all those miracles that happened in Egypt and on the sea. This was just an opening to what's coming for the future generations, a future redemption. And he writes that just like the entire world saw the work of God, they recognized that this was the work of God. Through the miracles of the final redemption, the world will also come to that realization. Sometimes we think to explain, to prove God or to prove the Torah, you need a couple of days, a couple of weeks. But it's very interesting. Our sages tell us that when Joseph said 2 words, the brothers understood the whole entire years that they were separated from one another. All those years that had passed by, in 2 words, they understood. I am Joseph. The same thing will be when the Messiah comes and the final redemption is here. God will say, I am God. Those 2 words, I am God. In English, it's 3. But it will all be very clear. You don't need books. You don't need a series of lectures. It will be very, very clear. Okay? Our next similarity between the redemption in Egypt and our times, the redemption of our days. It's written in the Shir HaShirim Rabbah, 2nd chapter, 24th paragraph. An amazing similarity. It says there, as we know, when Moses came to redeem the Jewish people, he comes and everyone's all excited and they bow down and they believe. I do believe. Yeah. And then things got really bad. then you had the Jews, instead of receiving their daily materials in order to make these cement blocks, now there's no more materials that are distributed. Now you got to find them on your own, like go into the fields, go into the alleyways, go into the garbage cans, and muster up all these materials. So things got really bad, so Moshe hit the road. Moshe had to leave. It doesn't say whether the Jews threatened him, but you could probably think it was probably the Jews were pretty upset. Here's a guy that comes, I'm going to redeem you. Not only does he not redeem you, but things are looking really bleak. Things are looking really down. So it could be that he had no choice. He had to hit the road again. Moses. So he had to leave. There's two opinions amongst the sages. Some say that he left for 3 months. Imagine he comes on the scene, hey, we're out of here. Boom. He really was out of there. And then he has to hide for 3 months. He goes back to Midian. Or there's some sources that say that he went back for 6 months. So the same thing will happen in the final redemption. We will see the appearance of Mashiach, a Messiah. And then the Messiah will also disappear. It's a Houdini kind of act. So just like Moses in the first redemption, the last redemption, our times, this is what's going to go down. Moses is also going to disappear. The Talmud tells us there's an argument how long of a period will the time of the Messiah period, how long will that go for? There's an opinion of 40 years, there's an opinion of 400 years. If you notice, both these numbers, 40 or 400, they're both based on the redemption of Egypt. Which means, in the glasses of our sages of the Torah, what we saw in Egypt, in the redemption, it's going to be recycled for the final redemption in our times. So therefore, 40 years is the period of the final redemption. Hey, that sounds familiar. That was the amount of time that the Jewish people wandered in the desert after the Exodus. Which means that it wasn't over. We say it ain't over till the fat lady sings. Well, it ain't over till we get into the land of Israel. And that really clicked the final redemption when we came into the land of Israel. As Moses was told that I will bring you into the land of Israel. There are five different languages of redemption, and the fifth and the final one is I will bring you into the land of Israel. So this was the promise, and this was the goal, to receive the Torah and go into the land of Israel. And that was supposed to be the end of history. They were supposed to build the temple, and that's all, folks. That's the way that it was supposed to play out. Unfortunately, because of our sins and our mess-ups, it didn't play out that way. But 40 years, similar, it will be again. Or there's a second opinion, 400. Oh, 400. That was the amount of time for the slavery in Egypt, 400 years. Abraham was told by God that your descendants will be slaves, and be in a foreign country, slaves for 400 years. Once again, the final redemption usurps its power from the first redemption of Egypt. Now this is a real doozer over here. It says in the Zohar, Rav Yitzchak Hutner, in his tremendous book Pachad Yitzchak, and he has a piece on Passover, the 71. Okay, page 71 on Passover. Rav Yitzchak Hutner was a tremendous Musar, ethical rabbi, and he tells us an amazing thing. He says, if you notice, Moses accepts on his own, Moses agrees to accept the Erev Rav. The Erev Rav were the multitudes of Egyptians and other nations that when they saw all of these miracles going down, they wanted to join the Jewish people, like jumping on the bandwagon. Moses did not consult God. He went and made his own decision. According to, there's a discrepancy amongst sages. How large of a population are we talking about? There are opinions that they are twice the size of the Jewish people leaving Egypt, or 3 times the amount of Jews, these converts, these multitudes who converted without the permission of God. There's an opinion they were 3 times the size of the Jewish people, which is an amazing thing. So the Jewish people were like a minority in the exodus of Egypt. Imagine that one. So Rav Richter says, what does this come to teach us? The fact that Moses, on the way out, he accepts these multitudes into the Jewish people. And remember, whenever you see something bad happening, whenever you see the Jewish people OTD, off the derech, off the correct path, the straight path, you know, not far away, there's the Erev Rav, these multitudes. They're not far away. For the entire history, since the time of Moses, until this very minute, usually the group that is causing us the trouble is these multitudes. Their descendants, their grandchildren, great, they go. So they're considered Jewish. They're within the Jewish people. But if you had a spiritual microscope, you would see that they're not your average Jew. Because a Jewish makeup is not the multitude makeup of the soul. It's not the same makeup. And it's not the same people at all. Exteriorly, everyone's considered to be Jewish. But it's a totally different group. For example, the Talmud tells us in the tractate of the laws of holidays, Beitzah, on page 32, it tells us various signs that you could tell if a person is a Jew or a person is from the multitudes, the converts of the multitudes. So, Rav Richter says an amazing line. He really hits it out of the stadium over here. He says, what is the Torah teaching us by telling us that Moses at the Exodus, at the exit gates of Egypt, he incorporates these multitudes. And he says, you know why? Because before the redemption, this group will cause tremendous trouble and problems for the Jewish nation. So Moses, as he's leaving Egypt, as he's leaving the slavery and going into the Exodus, we too, leaving the exile and about to enter the redemption, at that gate, at that threshold, we will suffer tremendously, he writes, with many souls that are from these multitude nations. And this is written in many places. I'm not going to go over them, but you could check it out in his book. He brings out many sources where this is repeated, that this is going to be what happened. This is going to be what goes down. The multitudes will have a major part to play before the final redemption. We look, you see what's happening around you. You see the cruelty. See what's going on. You can understand that these are not Jewish fingerprints here at all. These are the multitude fingerprints here. Okay, so that will be the same. The multitudes out of Egypt, the multitudes will return. Actually, they've never left, but they'll play a major role before the coming of also the final redemption. So that is just on one leg. We could continue going on. Similarities between redemption of Egypt and the final redemption in our days. Now, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he has a special talk that he gave. I don't remember exactly all the details, but I heard the discussion. I've listened to it a few times, and there he says that there is a fundamental difference between the exile, between the redemption of Egypt and our present day redemption. And what's the difference? That the Rebbe says, he goes on to say that in the times of Egypt, when the Jewish people were redeemed, only 20% of the Jews were redeemed. 80% died during the plague of darkness, which we discussed a lot last week. Why wasn't there no memorial? Why is there no memorial, Holocaust memorial for the 80% of Jews that passed away, that were killed in Egypt? But, so the Rebbe says, that was then. But in our times, no Jew will be left behind. Everyone will leave. And from that, you might, a famous Jewish song and a famous Jewish singer by the name of Avram Fried, no Jew will be left behind, no Jew will be left behind. No extra charge for that song. Yeah, so he made it famous. The song No Jew Will Be Left Behind, this is based, the song was based on that sicha, on that discussion by the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory. So now, of course, we are ashes compared to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. We're not taking on the Lubavitcher Rebbe here, so you can calm down. We are taking on the words. Whoever said it, it could be Lubavitcher Rebbe. I know that it is written in some other books, not by Lubavitcher Rebbe. So this idea is definitely, it's out there. It's out there. So let's look at the idea and not who said it. Some people get so tied up. If somebody said something, let's look at the idea. Let's weigh it. Let's look into it and weigh it for its merits, its pluses, and also minuses. Okay, so with the no Jew will be left behind, is that really how the final redemption is going to play out? Everyone, it's going to be one of these Hollywood happy endings? Is that the way it's going to play out? Okay. Here's where we start. We mentioned many similarities that are going to be in the future, in the present redemption, similar to what happened in Egypt. And here's one more. We know that during the plagues, the 9th plague in Egypt was the plague of darkness. Darkness was given, darkness was a plague, in order that the Egyptians should not see 80% of the Jewish people killed and not celebrate the downfall of the Jewish people. This 80%, an amazing amount, approximately 20 million Jews passed away in that Holocaust during the Exodus of Egypt. Is this an event that, God forbid, will reoccur? Will we play it again, Sam? God forbid. So an amazing source. The Holy Zohar Kadosh in Exodus, page 7, side B, talks about how all the nations of the world will gather together and fight and come against the Jewish people, the Jewish nation, against Jerusalem. And he says, there will be Jews that will join the forces of the nations of the world fighting against the Jewish people. Now, this shouldn't be such a shock, because it's actually a verse that if you look at it closely, it's a verse in the prophet Zechariah. He talks about the same thing, how in Judea, there will be Jews that will join up forces with the enemies of Israel fighting against the Jewish people. Now, today, you see this all over the place. There are many, many enemies. Some of the worst enemies of the Jewish people have always been, and probably will always be, the Jews. We are our worst enemies. So, there's nothing new here under the sun. The Zohar is just telling us that's the way it's going to go down. There will be Jews that will join forces with the nations of the world to fight against the Messiah during the days of the final redemption. And at this period, this is an amazing Zohar HaKadosh, at this period, the Holy Zohar tells us there will be 15 days of darkness. And many, this is his words, many of the Jewish people will perish during these 15 days of darkness. This is all based on a verse in Isaiah 60, chapter 60, verse 2, that in the end of days, there will be a tremendous darkness that will cover all the world and the nations. That's what the prophet Isaiah said. So an amazing thing. Think about that. That's frightening. In Egypt, there were 3 days. During those 3 days, 20 million approximately Jews perished. 15 days of darkness. I'm not even going to ask the question, why do we need so many days? Think about it on your own. It's too frightening to think about it. Why do we need 15 days? A student of Rashi, 900 years ago, Rabbi Yeshaya Matrani, in his commentary on the Torah, in the prophet Ezekiel 20:38, listen to what he says. This wasn't a one-time show. What happened in the darkness in Egypt when 80% of the wicked Jews perished that did not want to leave, and other reasons why they preferred to stay. But this is not, unfortunately, a one-time issue. And he writes in his commentary, I will take out the wicked amongst you from the lands that you inhabit, and I will bring you to a desert, and you will not come to the Holy Land. And just like the Jewish wicked in Egypt passed away during this period of darkness in Egypt, and did not merit seeing the redemption, so too in the times of Messiah. The prophet here has prophesied that the same fate will happen before the times of the coming of the Messiah. A darkness will once again come down on the world, on the land. Amazing thing. So, unfortunately, we see another source here bringing down this idea. Fasten your seatbelts for another one. This time, it's from the works of our holy sages, Tanchuma, in the portion of Baalotcha. It's Baalotcha and the 8th paragraph. Listen to what it says here. It says that when the Jewish people were in Egypt, there were many Jews that despised the Torah and despised circumcision. Once again, the Torah was not officially given, but throughout the generations, Abraham, he observed the Torah. Isaac observed the Torah. There were many, many things that the Jewish people did observe even before the Torah was given. As we know, even if the Torah was never given, there are many, many commandments, there are many, many ideas that we would still hit upon and accept upon ourselves. That's just the way that God created the world. So, there was a certain amount of population in Egypt, and when we look at the figures that only 20% left and 80% stayed, that is mighty frightening. That is really frightening to see that actually the good people were the minority at that time. And they worshipped idols in Egypt. As we know, when the Jewish people arrived at the sea, there was a tremendous prosecution. There was about to be a persecution against the Jews there by the Egyptians, but there was in the heavenly bodies, there was the angels were trying to prosecute the Jewish people, saying, why God are you about to drown the Egyptians and keep the Egyptians going? Because both people are idol worshippers. The Jews are idol worshippers and the Egyptians are idol worshippers. No one's better than the other. Why are you going to drown the Egyptians and have the Jews survive? So this was a problem in Egypt, as is written down, the words of our sages in Tanchuma. And the Jewish people did not listen. They did not listen to Moses, and they did not listen to the other prophets. What did God do? God brought darkness onto the Egyptians for 3 days, and he killed there all these wicked Jews. And then which verse does the Tanchuma bring? The Tanchuma brings down a verse in Ezekiel, chapter 20, verse 38, that this event will reoccur before the final redemption. We will look into this verse. I've quoted it here, but we will look in detail at this frightening verse. I think there should be groups that are formed to come home to the land of Israel called Ezekiel 20:38, because when we see what it says there, it's mighty frightening. So we see here that our sages look at these two events, the redemption and the Exodus and redemption in Egypt, and the redemption during the final days in our times. They look and they once again compare the prophecy, the future prophecy of the prophet Ezekiel, that there will be a similar process of darkness that will reoccur. We see it here once again. Okay, now, here we go. The prophecy, an amazing prophecy of the prophet Ezekiel. This is chapter 20, and it really starts on verse 32. It's really worthwhile to pull up a Torah, a Tanakh, and open it up and check it out, the words. Ezekiel, he was a unusual prophet. He prophesied. All the prophets were in the land of Israel, and Ezekiel was very interesting as he was outside the land of Israel. So he's prophesying during the period of First Temple destruction, Babylonian exile. That is the period that he's talking, and he's also prophesying for future, for the end of the days, for the future redemption. And he looks to the people of Babylonia, and he looks to the people in the final days, in our times. And what's his message? And he says, a rough translation here. I don't have my English Hebrew Torah on me here. What do you think, you sitting out there, outside the land of Israel, what do you think in your thoughts that everything will be okay? It will not be. You say that we will be like the nations of the world, like the families of the world. In order, we will worship idols here. Now, once again, don't think we're talking about the other guy. It's always easy to point the finger at the other guy. But when it says here to help those that worship stones and sticks and all kinds of foreign worships. What we're talking about here, which we see in other places when we use this expression, it's not necessarily talking about the Jews worshiping idols. But the fact is that when you're in their country, when you are subservient to them, it is if you are assisting them in their idol worshiping. So don't think it's the other guy, all those bad guys, the people that don't believe in God, the atheists, the scoffers, the non-believers. No, this could be us. This could be us. Because of the fact that we make a conscious decision to choose to live outside the land of Israel, we are assisting these idol worshippers. We are assisting them. And we will get into further detail with God's help. Hopefully we will get into an unbelievable Zohar that talks about this. And then God gives an oath via the mouthpiece of Yechezkel the prophet. He says, it will not be like this. I will rule over you with tremendous fury and wrath poured out. And then I will rule upon you. And I will take you out of the nations of the world. And I will bring you from all the lands with an outstretched hand and a strong arm and tremendous fury. He says this 3 times. And then where is he bringing us to? Not to the land of Israel. He's bringing us to the desert of the nations. Verse 35, I will bring you to the desert of the nations, and then I will judge you there. Just like I judge your forefathers, your forefathers in the 40 years, during the 40 years of the wandering in the wilderness after the exodus of Egypt, the Jewish people were judged there for 40 years. Not everyone made it out of that desert. So there will be a repeat. There will be a repeat of what happened during the time of Egypt. The prophet Yechezkel is talking about the final redemption. There will be a repeat. And what you think, okay, when you think that everything is going to play out okay, everything's going to be fine, okay, and that's the way things usually work out in Hollywood, but not necessarily in life. And then an amazing verse, 38. When I get the wicked of the Jewish people, when I get them out into the desert of the nations, I will there have a cleansing. I will there have a purification process. I will then have a separation, the good and the evil. So once again, the prophet, he's looking at the people in Babylonia, but he's also talking for the generations before the final redemption. In our times, he's talking to us, and he's telling that he's going to bring the Jewish people into a desert. And just like in the first movie, in Egypt, the Jewish people were judged 40 years in the desert, and many of them were killed off. Many of them were killed off during those 40 years. There will be another period where God will cleanse and purify and choose which people will continue on into the promised land, into the Holy Land, which ones of them will be redeemed, and which ones will not and will be destroyed. That's what he's saying, an amazing thing. Now listen to the words of our commentators. We have Rashi. Rashi says on this verse that I will choose amongst you from the criminals and the ones that are not on the correct path. I will not bring you into the land of Israel. You will die in the desert. That's the future. So what does this mean? So Rashi, the major commentator on the Torah, says that God will make a selection between different people. And I will bring you out of your lands of exile, and I will kill you in the desert. So God gathers up the Jewish people from outside the land of Israel, and he brings them all into a desert, and there's some kind of purification period. We'll see how long it is for. And there will be a selection who will go ahead into the final redemption and who will be, unfortunately, God forbid, who will be destroyed. That's what Rashi says. Listen to this, the Radak, an amazing line. Why doesn't God destroy them in their lands of the exile? Why does he have to bring them into a desert? Isn't that unusual? Why doesn't God, somewhere in the world, wherever the Jews are scattered, why doesn't God just send some kind of sickness and illness, a plague, and just finish it there? What is all this wasting of time? We're bringing the Jews into a desert. And listen to these words. This is a replay of what happened in Egypt. In Egypt we said, why did God kill the Jewish people during the plague of darkness? Because God did not want there to be a desecration of his name. He did not want to see the nations of the world celebrating and partying due to the downfall of the Jewish people dying. So therefore God, you know that song? That's the night when the lights went out in Georgia. That's the night. You know that song? So this was the night when the lights went out in Egypt. So God turns off the electricity in Egypt. Why? So the Egyptians won't see the Jewish people perishing, dying, 80% of them being buried. And therefore they will not celebrate. And therefore there will not be the desecration of God's name. The same thing, an unbelievable Radak. The commentator Radak, an unbelievable. He hits it out of the park. Just the same, what happened in Egypt is going to happen again. Therefore, God takes us out of the nation, out of the lands of the nations, so they don't see it. And he brings us into a desert where there's no fans, there's no stadium, there's no seats, and no one's going to see it. No one's going to see it except for the Jewish people. And therefore, there will not be a desecration of God's name. This is going to replay itself. Amazing. We have the Mahari Kra, Rav Yosef Kara. He lived about 900 years ago. And then he says the following. He says, just like I judged your forefathers in the desert when they left Egypt, that many of them that left Egypt did not merit to come into the land of Israel. Same thing will be in the final redemption. The same process will once again happen. So we see the prophet Ezekiel. He tells us in black and white that this will happen again. And we see Rashi, and we see the Radak, and we see the Mari Kra, and we saw the Tanchuma, and all the others that we saw today. They're all pointing the same finger. To get a little bit more details on this process, we have here in Shir HaShirim Rabbah, 2nd chapter, paragraph number 22. Rabbi Yehuda says that just like the first Redeemer Moses, he revealed himself and then disappeared, same thing will be in the final redemption where the Messiah will appear to the Jewish people and then he will disappear. How long will the Messiah disappear? Okay, Moses, he went for 3 months or 6 months. How long is this one going to be? When God takes us out of the nations, out of the lands of the nations, and he gathers us in the desert so they don't see what's happening. And then there's going to be a selection process. There's going to be a purification process. And the good and the bad Jews, okay, God forbid, they'll perish. And the good Jews will move on to receive the final redemption in the land of Israel. How long is he going to disappear for? So, it brings down a verse in Daniel 12:11 that it will be a process of 45 days. 45 days. Just want to warn you, there are sources that say not days but years. 45 years that he will disappear. So there's a discrepancy how long of a process is going to be. It could also be depending on our actions, depending on what spiritual state that we're in, how long it's going to have to carry on like that. So these 45 days that the Messiah is going to disappear from the Jewish people, and we're in the desert, and there ain't no food in the desert, and we're eating just like, they have classes that teach you how to survive in the wilderness. I know that we have a great Jew over here in Tapuach, and Nadav, and he's, at different times, he's taken us out you know, for a couple of days, and he shows you how you could survive in the wilderness with no food. What plants can you eat? What you have to know these things. You don't want to poison yourself, you know. Oh God, you ate the wrong, you know, you ate the wrong plant over there. So the Jewish people are going to be eating like disgusting, like thorns. And every 3 years I take a group of Talmud Torah kids that were successful in learning the first Aliyah, the first Torah portion of every single week. That's 54 of them in a year. They learn it by heart and with the musical notes. Those that are successful in doing this, I take them for 3 days. I fly them out to Eilat on an airplane, and we spend 3 days in Eilat. And we have an unbelievable tour guide. Give him a little plug here. His name is Rabbi Gadi Herling. He's an amazing guy, amazing tour guide. He's a rabbi, and he's also a tour guide. And we go on hikes with him for hours and hours and hours. And he shows us, you know, he shows us different things that a person could eat if they get stuck in the desert, in the Sinai desert in Eilat. Tells you how to get water from various plants. So there's, you know, it's not an easy situation, but you could learn about it. So this is going to be really, really a terrible situation where Jews are going to start, you know, eating these herbs or thorn bushes. And there will be people here, it says, that will join the nations of the world. During this 45-day period, there will be Jews that will join the nations of the world. It's too much for us, you know, get us out of here. And they're going to join forces. And they will be killed. Those will be killed. After 45 days, the Messiah once again is revealed, and the manna bread, just like the first time during the Exodus of Egypt, the manna bread came down a month after the Exodus on the 15th day of the month of Iyar, 30 days after the Exodus. So here, 45 days after the Exodus from the nations of the world, their lands, into the desert, after 45 days, there will be the manna bread to save the show, and then the Jewish people will enter the land of Israel. So we see here, how many people are we talking about? Doesn't say here. How many people? It says that there will be a group, there will be Jews that will join forces in the desert with the nations of the world, and they will be killed off. How long of a process? An amazing figure. He was born in 1780, Rabbi Yehuda Akalai. He was born 50 years before Herzl, and Herzl's father was a student of Rabbi Yehuda Alkalai. An amazing idea. Think about it. Herzl, some say even 50 years before Herzl was born, Rabbi Yehuda Alkalai came up with a plan of a Jewish state, a real Jewish state. And many say that a lot of the ideas that Herzl wrote down were from his father's rabbi, Rav Yehuda Alkalai. He was an amazing figure, way ahead of his time. Once again, he was born in 1780. And he has many, many books. One of them is the writings of Rav Yehuda Alkalai. In the first book, there's 2 of them. And the page 233, some of editions are 254. And he says an amazing thing. He brings down this idea that wherever the Jews are amongst the nations, they will be gathered to the desert, to a desert. And there will be a period of purification, of selection, of choosing and separating the good from the bad. How many people are, God forbid, if we don't wake up, how many people are we going to lose? And he brings down here some proof. He says 1 out of 10 will make it in the desert. 1 out of every 10. Think about it. In Egypt, 20%. 20% made it. Here, 10%. 10% will survive this process of purification. Okay, who are we talking about? I want to know, God forbid it, is he talking about me? Is it me he's talking about? Or is the other guy, the other people? I don't have anything to worry about. You see, I got my black hat, I got my payas, I got my beard, I got my long black hat, black coat. I'm okay. I'm good. I'm good to go. I go to synagogue every day, 3 times a day, I'm good to go. Is that how it's going to be? So let's look. According to the holy Bnei Yissaschar, he says in 2 places that he says in his the Bnei Yissaschar goes according to the months of the year, and he has during the months of Kislev and Tevet, he has a certain on paragraph 138. He says an amazing thing, that we should know that the multitudes, these converts, these multitudes, they're not really a part of the Jewish people. They're within us. They're sitting amongst us. They are considered to be one of us, but they're not us. And they are throughout history, they are our downfall. Says it straight out. Amazing thing. In another place, in the month of Shvat and Adar, on page 143, Bnei Yissaschar says the following. And he brings the verse of the prophet Ezekiel 20:38. You got to know it by heart by now, when he talks about the gathering of the Jews into the desert. What population are we talking about? And then he writes that we're talking about the multitudes. The ones that are going to perish in the desert are going to be the multitudes, the Erev Rav. And once they are finished off, once these multitudes are finished off, then the Jewish people can accept the redemption. An amazing thought. That's the opinion of the Bnei Yissaschar. This population that will perish, that will be eliminated, that will be cleared from the Jewish people, separated from the Jewish people. This will be the multitudes of the nations. There's another population in another work of Rabbi Yehuda Alkalai in his book Me'oded Anavim, page 13. An amazing statement. He says, listen to these words. Just like when God removed the Jewish people from the exile in Egypt and he redeemed us, there were only 20% of the Jewish people that agreed to go. 80% did not agree to go, and they were killed in 3 days of darkness. And then listen to this. How much more so in our days? Now this is in the early 1800s. He was born in 1780. This is the early 1800s he's talking about. He's talking about 200, 180 years ago, 200 years ago. Listen to this. How much more so? What happened to them? They didn't want to leave? How much more so in our time? When we are sitting and things are good, and things are quiet, and things are peaceful amongst the lands that we are inhabiting. If God forbid, people would die that do not want to leave the exile, if they would die just like in the days of Egypt, we would not have one person left, maybe one person in a city left, and the rest would choose to stay. Folks, if you don't freak out, if you're not hitting the walls and the ceilings and screaming top of your lungs there, you don't get an unbelievable Unbelievable touchdown here by Rav Yuda Alkalai. He's telling us he's looking out in the early 1800s. If that's going to be one of if the same story is going to happen again, where the redemption will be dependent on those that want to leave and those that do not want to leave. He's looking in the mirror. He's putting the cards on the table. He's facing the music, Rav Yuda Alkalai. This is no jive. People could tell you with their mouths, oh, of course, I want to go. I want to go to the land. I want to go to Israel, to the land of Israel. They could talk with their mouths from today until they are blue in the face. The question is, deep down, when times are good and peaceful, do they really, or have they forgotten about the land of Israel? And they feel 100% at home wherever they are in the exiles, the Western civilization countries. They feel at home. He's telling us. He's telling it like it is. He's telling the truth. If the gates were open in his time for redemption, just like in Egypt, 20% left, 80% did not want to leave. It's even worse today, he's saying, that only one person from each city maybe would get up and leave. So folks, it's incumbent upon us to heed the words of Rav Yuda Alkalai. How many of us really, really deep down want to leave and go to the land of Israel and really want to be redeemed? Next.
Richter, so how does this apply to people who are already in Israel?
How does this apply to people who are already in Israel? Well, just like there are sources that there will be a period, even in the land of Israel, where people will be tossed out for a certain amount of time, and there will be some kind of division and separation and purification process that will happen even within the people of Israel. So it's once again, it's on a much less scale, but there is definitely a possibility of a process like that being tossed out of the land of Israel in the final days and then coming back.
Not everyone will come back of those who are tossed out.
Right. Not everyone will come back. Okay, so we have here the first opinion that we saw by the Bnei Yisachar. We're talking about the ones that will perish are the Erev Rav, the multitudes of the nations. That's who we're talking about here. According to Rav Alkalai, we're talking about people that are living the good life, people that are tranquil, people that are living a peaceful existence. They're not really interested in leaving. They're not really interested in coming to the land of Israel and immersing themselves in the holiness here, in the special land, this special land that we're blessed to be here today. They're not really interested. Our next source. This is from Rabbi Eliyahu Chaim Cohn in his book Otzrot Torah, and he says that those that despair from redemption, those that despair from being redeemed, those are the people that will perish in the 45 days. Now, let's get it clear. We spoke about this, if you remember the class. If not, it's worthwhile to go see it. We spoke about the two super villains or superheroes, Datan ve'Aviram. They were a little bit of both. They were a little bit of country. They were a little bit of rock and roll. So as the song goes. So we see there that even though they were wicked, they did believe in the redemption of the Jewish people. which means there were people that were religious but did not really believe in the redemption. And once again, we're not talking about, parroting words and slogans and sayings which, put your money where your mouth is. We're talking about somebody that really, really believes that the Jewish people will be redeemed any day, any minute. When you're buying houses, when you're buying a house somewhere outside the land of Israel, you do not really believe in redemption. You do not really believe. You could talk it, you could talk the talk, you could walk the walk, but it's not really true. We're really stuck. We're really stuck in our exile. We're really stuck in the sweet exile. And if we look in the mirror and we'll search out the truth. So that's what Rabbi Cohen is telling us, that these people, the ones that do not really believe in redemption, they will be the ones that will be destroyed in the 45 days or 45 years in the desert of the nations. So we have to always strengthen ourselves in true belief in the redemption that we believe. There were great rabbis that had suits, that they bought special clothes, and they had the blessings when the Messiah comes to say they were people that believed. They believed at any minute that they were out. They would hear something, or they would hear a news item, and they heard redemption. They really believed. Most people are not on that level. Most people are not there. Listen to this. This is an amazing, folks, I have to tell you, I don't want anyone to get injured out there. Put on 2 seatbelts for this one. One of the great Musar, ethical giants of the previous generation, it was Rabbi Cheska Levenstein of the Panovich Yeshiva. Listen to what he says. He says, I don't understand. Moses comes to the Jewish people. This is an amazing thing. Moses comes to the Jewish people. He says, hi guys, I'm here. The redemption. He says a few words, a few codes, puts in that code. And everything's looking great. And the redemption is here. God has sent me. And the Jewish people believe. They bow down and they believe in the redemption. Okay, a few verses later, now there's new decrees. And now all of a sudden, they're threatening Moses. What's going on over here? Why are things getting so bad? You promised redemption. Instead of redemption, things are getting much worse. Moses has to run away. 6 months. I don't understand. Didn't you just tell me 2 verses ago that the Jewish people believed in Moses and in redemption? And now they don't believe in Moses and redemption? So fast it switched around. So listen to what he says. He says, there's talk and there's actions. It's not the same. They talked redemption. Yes, we believe. We believe. But really, they were not there. Really, they were not there. And he says, look, I'll show you proof. He says, look, 80% of the Jewish people did not leave Egypt. Why is that? They, of course, did believe in redemption. Listen to these words and never forget them. Rav Levenstein is telling us that, of course, the 80% believed in redemption. They believed in redemption. But to leave what we already have and what we've become accustomed to, that's something else. They believed in a virtual redemption, in the concept of a redemption. But to leave? To actually, one second, I got to get my bags ready here. I got to make a few phone calls. I got to sell a few of my, to do it? Just do it? I mean, that's good for Nike. I don't know if it's good for redemption. An amazing Rav Levenstein. Folks, think about this. They were slaves. 86 years they were slaves. But the last half a year, they were no longer slaves. So things were looking really well. The Egyptians had a lot of respect for the Jews. You can imagine after receiving 10 plagues, they probably were pretty friendly to the Jewish people. You know, they didn't want 11th plague or 12th. So things were looking up. We know the language. We know the streets. We don't need ways, Egyptian ways. We know the mentality here. We have, you know, go back to our businesses. They were very well-to-do before, at least before the slavery hit in. So now, just getting back to, you know, what we were accustomed to. It's very, very difficult. It's not easy. Anybody that left, anybody out here that left knows what we're talking about here. It's not easy. It's definitely not easy. But it ain't easy to be a Jew. Okay, so the Rav Levenstein, he's telling us about the not realistic people. Those are going to be the people. They were the ones in Egypt that perished because we believe in redemption, but it's not realistic. It's not realistic. We believe in the land of Israel. We believe the land of Israel is holy and special, and there's a commandment to live there, and it's equal to all the commandments, and then we could keep on going on for days. But it's not realistic. That's the 4/5. Believe in redemption, believe, but it's not realistic. The next, the holy Netziv, Naftali Tzvi, Yehuda of Berlin, famous books, commentary on the Torah, you name it. He also has a commentary. He also has a Haggadah on Pesach, and he brings amazing stuff here. He says straight out on page 140 in his Haggadah, it's called Imre Shefer. He brings down that just like during the first redemption that God ruled over the Jewish people with tremendous fury, killed 80% of the Jewish people, wrath, fury. This is how it will be, he writes, in the future redemption. This is the way it's going to be. Just like the prophet Ezekiel, has commented in 2038. This is exactly how it's going to go down. And the wicked will be gathered up and they will perish during this time. That's what he writes in the verse of Biat Chazakah, in a strong outstretched hand. Whenever the Torah uses an expression of an outstretched hand, we're talking about fury, we're talking about wrath, we're talking about a destruction here. And then he goes on. He says, think about it. Why did the Jewish people refuse to leave Egypt? Why did many of them refuse to leave Egypt? He says, you have to understand, they were not regular slaves. They were not slaves to Egyptians. They were slaves to the kingdom. Psh, psh, burn rubber on that one. An amazing, the Netziv, an amazing line. The Jewish people were slaves, but not what you think they were slaves, in somebody's house or in somebody's field or picking cotton, you know, like on the old plantation. No. They were slaves, but they were slaves to the monarchy. They were slaves to the high class, to the elite. Imagine that. You know, sometimes, you know, you see these like custodians, and you know, they have an in because they're custodians in the White House, so they can just go up to Trump and, you know, say, give him a high five or a low five, or now they hit you with your body or something there. You know, I don't know what that's called, but so hey, how is he able to do that? If I want to speak to Trump, I have no chance. He's the custodian, man. You know, I'm a professor. I'm intelligent. I went to college for, I mean, there's a lot of people that aren't intelligent in college, but that's for another subject. But I can't get in there. None of us can get in there. But that custodian who never learned, he got thrown out of third grade, man. But he's in and out with Trump, and he's having some words with the president. That's how it works. So that's what the Netziv is saying here. There were many. The Jews were slaves to the elite. The elite of the Egyptians, not the regular peasants of the Egyptians. Slaves to slaves, you might say it. No, they were slaves to the elite. And number two, many of them were well-to-do. And many of them had many connections to the Egyptian government. Not the way that we usually were taught and understood the goings-on in Egypt. And he said, so too today. These are his words on page 41 in his Agada. Imre Shefer says the same thing today. That there are many that do not want to be redeemed. And the same thing will happen as it happened in Egypt. For those that really deep down do not want to be redeemed. We saw in the words of the Netziv, why don't they want to be redeemed? Well, you know, they have a good job. They're slaves to now actually they're not even slaves. Now they're probably, you know, freelance workers over there. But they're connected to the government. They're well-to-do. They got their jobs back. Things are, you know, things are hunky-dory now. Looking up. So, just like he says, just like then, today the same situation. Many Jews really do not want to be redeemed. They're happy to continue as is. Okay, last but not least, this is an amazing line. In the book Mishchat Aaron by Rav Aaron Peretz, on page 245, there was a good question here about differences between, of course, class here is based on Jews that are outside the land of Israel and not inside the land of Israel. But as we said, there are various scenarios also for the people in Israel. There's also various scenarios, not anywhere compared to the scenarios of people outside the land of Israel. But listen to what he says here. He says there will come when the day comes and the Jews in the land of Israel will be resurrected. They will be a new spiritual entity once they are resurrected. They will be similar to Adam before the sin, before Adam and Eve sinned. They will be close to the spiritual heights of Moses, and they will be very close to the angels. And when their brethren, those that were gathered up from the nations of the world, from the lands of the nations of the world, when they're gathered up, and they will see their brothers in Israel at this tremendous spiritual level. Listen to this, folks, and remember these words always. And they will come with complaints to the Messiah and say, what is the difference between us, that we were living outside the land of Israel, and these people that were living inside the land of Israel? And listen to the answer of the Messiah. Everything is measure for measure, the Messiah will say. Those of you that were outside the land of Israel, and tried and came to the land of Israel. You made an effort, you came to the land of Israel in order that you should purify yourselves here and become more holy. And you didn't care about your money. Listen to these words. Open up your hearts. Listen to these words. It's amazing. He's telling us straight out. Listen to them. Those that came from outside the land of Israel, they wanted to uplift themselves. They did not care about their monetary situation, the financial situation. They didn't care about their physical state. They were not afraid that maybe on the way their ship would drown, or maybe they would be kidnapped and used as captives on the way. They made sure that it was always their flag was our spirituality. That's what comes first. And therefore, because of the fact that they put on the back burner, they put their bodies and their physical needs in the back burner, therefore the people that came up to the land of Israel voluntarily, and they gave up a tremendous amount. They gave up friends, they gave up family, they gave up kinship, they gave up their jobs, they gave up houses, they gave up the good life, and the beat goes on. We could keep on going. So these people made a statement here, made a statement that what's more important to us is the spirituality, and spirituality is the land of Israel. And that's what's more important to us. So therefore, they will be the ones that will receive this tremendous spiritual uplifting during the resurrection of the dead. But however, you chose, you of the nations of the world, the Jews of the nations of the world, you chose that it was more important your money and your physical needs, and you chose to stay outside. Therefore, you get the back seat. Folks, an amazing, amazing. Remember, Mishchat Aaron, page 246. Look it up. An amazing line there. So, no Jew will be left behind. I mean, I'm the first one to pray that that's the way that it's going to play out. That's the way it's going to go down. But unfortunately, there are too many signs. Look in the world. Look at the chaos that the world is in. The world is an entire upheaval. The economic situation. It's clear. The handwriting is on the wall. It's clear. It's unfortunate. But if we don't wake up, this might be the scenario of Ezekiel 20:38.